So Elaine was born, she developed cancer at the age of 14. It has defined my life in terms of how I view good and bad. So I literally shed the past, metaphorically,
totally.
And I emerged as this shiny, new,
polished head.
creature. People talk about, good at art, inverted commas. What they mean is you've got good hand skills, you've got that level of dexterity. That's a different thing from being creative.
Yeah.
And I think people get the two mixed up. You can have the most unbelievable hand skills, but not know what to do with them.
You lack the creative mind. So, Gerard Burns, thanks very much for joining me. How are you today?
I am fantastic, bit wet.
A bit wet out there after returning from Spain. No, thanks very much for finding the time to come on. I'm really chuffed to have you on. A world-renowned artist. Surprised you're not in an exhibition in New York or London or something. You're a winner of several awards. Do you know you've got a celebrity guest list, purchased your paintings. You've done so much work for charity. We'll talk about Doddy Weir and the My Name's Doddy Foundation charity, which is close to my heart as well. But your life and your success that you've got now, it didn't come easy. So what I like to do with my guests is go back to the start, tell me how it all began, where you grew up, your childhood and your life up until now.
So I was an overspill kid. I don't know whether that would mean a lot to other than my generation. Born in Glasgow, brought up in Springburn, quite a rough area. But there was when they built the new towns, East Kilbride and Cumbernauld, it was an opportunity for people to find better homes, I suppose. So I moved out of Glasgow at the age of 4.5 out to Cumbernauld. And Cumbernauld was wonderful. It gets a bit of a bad name now, a bit of a bad reputation, possibly because of the town centre, but it was an amazing place to grow up. Loads of open space, lots of freedom. And I started school in Cumbernauld and lived there basically until I got married. And as I say, lots and lots of happy years there.
Did you leave your family in Glasgow? Your aunties and uncles all remained in Glasgow and you just moved?
So actually a lot of them, they all moved. You think about your aunties and uncles, especially when you're wee, they seem to be these people they've got everything sussed, they know everything. But thinking about it, my own kids are now the age or slightly older than my parents would have been when they brought me out to Cumbernauld. It must have been a big step for them, to leave behind what they knew. I mean, my dad was an engineer, and when he's been asked about this, he said Burris was a big employer,
right.
But they came for the house. Essentially, he got the job, and on the back of getting the job, they got this house. So for them, I mean, the difference between a room and kitchen, which is what we lived in Springburn, and this house that basically we lived in until, as I say, I got married and moved out of the house.
So when you say a room and kitchen, it's literally like 5 people, your mother and father, yourself and your siblings in one room, and then they had...
So they had a room and kitchen, so there'd be a big, there'd be a bedroom, there was a hallway, and there was the kitchen, but in the kitchen, that was your living area.
Right, okay.
And for most people in the old tenements, you would also have a bed recess.
Right, okay.
So I remember it very, very clearly. Actually, I suppose I remember it a bit better. I have very clear memories about living there myself in the back court. I mean, you think about this, the back court. You had the middens, you had, it was it was filthy. I mean, you played in puddles. But I remember it probably a bit clearer from my grandparents. My granny Urquhart, they lived the next close. And after we moved out to Cumbernauld, I went back. And I remember actually on one occasion, probably quite a tough kid when I think about going back in and getting a bit of grief from a bunch of guys. Posh kid having moved out of Cumbernauld and ended up fighting out the back court. Coming back in, my granny and grandfather were appalled, but So probably worlds away from the world that we moved to out in Cumbernauld.
Yeah. And were you always quite creative yourself and your siblings? Did you always see a future in art, or is that something that just happened as you got older?
Not at all. So I was always, suppose, creative, as in I'd always had really pretty exceptional hand skills. When people talk about, well, I was a teacher for a lot of years. When people talk about, good at art, inverted commas, what they mean is you've got good hand skills. You've got that level of dexterity that you can reproduce either on paper or with paint or in 3 dimensions. That's a different thing from being creative.
Yeah.
And I think people get the two mixed up. You can have the most unbelievable hand skills, but not know what to do with them.
Yeah. You lack the creative mind.
And sometimes I think in what's described as the contemporary art world, the idea is paramount. So what you have is people who have loads of brilliant ideas, but they lack the means in terms of hand skills to actually convey that idea. So yes, as a kid, I was always the best in the class at art. And we've got things from when I was that age, and I have to say, probably fairly impressive. I mean, as I say, I was a teacher, and I watched lots of kids coming through who had better hand skills than me when I was their age. Yeah. But they didn't want to do anything with it because that combination of the two is the thing that kind of fires it.
Yeah. And going back to your family life in Cumbernauld, obviously you just settled there, but unfortunately tragedy was to strike the family. Not so long after moving there.
Yeah. So Elaine was born in the house in Cumbernauld, and she would just say caught cancer. She developed cancer at the age of 14. Right. So we were there for 14 years.
Right. Okay.
When we discovered that she had cancer, and from nowhere, basically. I mean, a very fit, healthy girl, sporty. And initially, it was diagnosed as a frozen shoulder because there were no other particular symptoms. But very quickly, it became obvious that it was much more serious than that. So, I think from diagnosis to when she died, it was quick. I think it was less than a year. So, and my parents, what do you do in these circumstances? I mean, how do you deal with that? They shielded us from it. To the extent that probably I wasn't really aware until quite far on just how bad things were. I think it became obvious towards the end, but you're living with a sister who's unwell.
What age were you at this point?
So I had just started art school. I was 18.
Right, you're still really young yourself.
Yeah. So, yep. So, and it's an experience that I would say if it. The old cliche, what doesn't break you makes you stronger. It has defined my life in terms of how I view good and bad. Having experienced how bad it can get at that early age, it changes your perspective.
Oh, totally.
You think differently about what other people would consider to be monumental issues. I did lose sight of that perspective at a point in my life, but basically that has stayed with me. And obviously it's a tragedy, and I do think about Elaine all the time. It's amazing, even after all this time. But it's not something that makes me desperately unhappy anymore. Yeah. It's a treasure, actually, that memory.
Yeah. Moving forward into some of your kind of topics of your art, your paintings, there's a angel series that you've done, and I always, a couple of times I met you after reading your book, and I always wanted to ask you but didn't feel comfortable asking you. Was the angel a connection to Elaine? So
that's a very interesting question. You think about what I do. What I do is I create these combinations of images from where, and at times I would say, if you were to dig too deep, probably a psychologist would have an absolute field day. I would have said, so the straight answer to that question is that I was in Jerez Airport. We have this, we're extremely lucky that we have this beautiful house down near Cadiz in Andalusia. I was in Jerez Airport waiting for my cousin arriving. And there was at that point, it was quite underdeveloped. There was an old bookstall and there was a black and white book, a photograph in a black and white book in Spanish. And there was a wee girl on the front cover with a white dress on, with a wing under her arm. And I thought, that looks like one of my paintings. So I bought the book, made the paintings, and I used the daughter of close friends who would be about 11 at that point, 12. And it wasn't till after I'd made the paintings that the mum, who I've known since we were kids, she said to me, you know what you're painting here, Gerard, don't you?
I see.
I thought, she said, well, you're painting Elaine, obviously. I thought, my God, how obvious is that when it's pointed out in that way? But to me at that point, I was simply responding to, and I don't know, I suppose through painting, you're working things out. You know, you're in its own way, like writing a book. So subconsciously, that was obviously, you know, so these paintings of wee girls lost in the forest, protected by wolves.
Yeah.
It's not that big a leap to understand that that's what I'm probably unpacking in these paintings.
Totally subconsciously, though.
Initially subconsciously.
I always wondered that, and I just didn't want to ask for obvious reasons. So moving on from that, then this was at the start of your Glasgow School of Art learning. How did that go? Did you enjoy it? Did you love it? Did you get a chance to express yourself there?
Art school was brilliant, but in terms of actually learning anything, I thought it was a joke. That's real heresy, because what you're supposed to say about Glasgow School of Art is, oh, gosh, this amazing institution and gosh and all that stuff. I found it a very confusing experience and actually deeply disappointing, because there is this bullshit around about, you know, art and being an artist, which has gone on to ridiculous heights, as I say, in the contemporary art world, where you're supposed to arrive at art school almost as the finished product. You know, the day you walk in the door, you're supposed to kind of know who you are, know what you're doing, and all they're really doing is just polishing up around the edges, instead of which, I mean, there are a few people who arrive and they have quite a clear line, but 99% of people, you're just kids.
Straight from school.
I wanted people to teach me stuff. You know, let's take a musical analogy. If you were to go to the conservatoire, okay, you arrive there with a degree of technical ability, but the idea that you're the finished product is ludicrous. So I arrived. It was an amazing experience, just in terms of socially. It was just the most incredibly, a place full of energy and all these wonderful people. But as I got into second year, when I got into painting, particularly when I got into third year, it just nosedived for me, because I wanted to paint the way I paint now. And there was no space for that at that point in Glasgow School of Art.
Was it just too contemporary for them?
No, probably the opposite.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, really, there was a school of what would be classed as abstract expressionist landscape, people like Jimmy Robertson, Barbara Ray, and there was a kind of parallel world going on. People like Peter Howson, Ken Curry were at arts. They were a year above me, 2 years above me, and they were working in what was called a figurative way, and they were sort of representational. But if you know their work, it's got a cartoonish quality. Yeah. Well, I wasn't interested in that. I didn't want to change what I was seeing. I simply wanted to take elements from the real world and represent them on canvas the way the old masters did. That was, and I just couldn't find a space for it. So third year at art school was really, really tough. And eventually I gave in. I gave in, and actually what I ended up, I got my degree, I became an abstract expressionist. And I suppose trying to find a positive in there, what it taught me was a love of paint itself and a love of surface on a canvas, which if you were able to get in front of any of the larger works that I produce, there are areas within these paintings which are purely abstract, which are absolutely about the paint and that combination of the kind of pristine finish. So if I took anything from it, and I'm trying to be kind, that was what I took from my art school experience. So much so, it was such a negative experience that I chucked it.
Moved away from art
completely. I mean, for a boy who defined himself by my art, I was probably 3 years out of art school, and I didn't make a single mark on paper, which is actually
that's sad.
Yeah, I mean, it really knocked it out of me.
And did your parents think that you had just wasted 4 years of your life?
They
Did you not waste time on engineering as well?
I did. I was an engineer for a year, which, oh my God, that was just talking about being in the wrong place.
They knew you would come back to it at some point, probably.
Well, I mean, looking at my own granddaughter now, who's 15, you know, I suppose they would be feeling the same way. You know, I got good grades. I was a bright kid. I was sporty. But going to Strathclyde University to do engineering taught me a lesson, again, which has stayed with me. I was probably a boy who could just about turn my hand to anything. I got really good grades for all my O-levels and higher at that point. And the advice was, well, you know, go and do a science. You know, so I went to Strathclyde to do engineer, and I was just the dunce. I just couldn't. I just couldn't do it. You know, and it taught me that there are different brains. There was stuff going on in the lectures, and other people like kind of look at me like, well, aye, that's obvious. So at that time, you could get what was called a repeat year grant. Could you imagine such a thing? So it was accepted that at the age of 17 that you might make a mistake.
Get a second chance. You get a second chance.
Pick another subject. So, I mean, talk about, you know, engineering to art. So you said, you know, when I came out of art school, did my parents think it was a wasted 4 years? I think they thought when I went to art school, okay, let him get this out of his system. Yeah. And they didn't teach you anything. That is one of my real bugbears. You came out with a degree, but you came out with nothing. No skills, no ability to translate that into any way of making a living, unless you were really clued up or you had strong people run about you to guide you. So you taught, people went into teaching.
Right, okay. That was just a natural progression.
That's what you did. You know, that was the job when you came out of art school, unless, as I say, so again, I'm talking about drawing and painting and sculpture, possibly textiles and a lot of these departments. There was a career path, but not in drawing and painting at all.
Is that when you found music?
Music was always there, right through my late teens. In fact, Elaine, I was always a songwriter, so I've got some brilliant recordings of her actually singing songs that I'd written.
That's amazing.
Yeah, you know, fantastic. So, and I came to art school, and I was more. I came from John Denver, Stevie Wonder, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, and I met this fantastic guy who has kind of re-entered my life recently. A guy called Brian McPhee, who and we formed a band at art school, and Brian was television, Gang of Four. Heavy metal. I mean, you couldn't imagine the most, but between us, we formed a band at art school, and actually, when I left art school, that's what we did. Yeah. Basically, I wanted to be a musician, I wanted to be a pop star.
You were signed to a record label down in London, supported Simple Minds and stuff as well. We
did good. I mean, it was an amazingly. Again, I've said the art school was an amazing experience, not particularly because of the art. Being a musician and playing in a band, I mean, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about it, just do it. It's the most brilliant thing. even if you're rubbish, you know,
even if you're not successful, do you
it
know,
doesn't
you still
matter.
probably learn so much about yourself.
You do.
Have the time of your life, meet like-minded people, and just go for it.
And skills, you know, so the ability to stand behind a mic in front of a room with 5 people in it or 5,000 people in it, these are amazing skills in terms of like confidence, skills which, again, at the time I thought they meant nothing, but in later life, that ability on lots and lots of different levels, once I went into teaching, amazing. And we got close with Valerie in the Week of Wonders. We, again, looking back on it, there was some really good material, but it's a toss of a coin. You know, had we had just a wee sliver of luck, maybe. But again, looking back on it, had it been successful for me, I wanted it more than anything I could possibly tell you, but it would have been a disaster for me on a million levels. So although it broke my heart when we finally chucked it, in retrospect, as I say, it would have been a poison chalice. It was the right thing.
Had you met your wife by that point?
I was married. So I got married literally, so I finished art school in 84. We signed the record deal in 84 and I got married in 84. So
controversial. No many lead singers of a band would get married the same year.
I know. So, and I mean, Ellen and I, that's been one of the biggest and best decisions I ever made, you know, and who knows whether that relationship would have survived if the music business had taken off.
If you were away for months on end, touring the world.
Yep.
It takes a strong person to be able to deal with that and support. So, did you go back to art then?
I went back to teaching. I went back to teaching. I gave it my best shot with the band, and I think we maybe through 4 years at it. Really tried hard at it. The record deal, it fell away, and I played with a lot of other different bands after that, and got really close to signing a record deal on my own. My generation, a band called Fairground Attraction, Eddie Reader, they went to number 1, and all of a sudden there was this real resurgence and interest in kind of solo singer-songwriters, and that was what I was doing at that point. Right. And there was a lot of record company interest around what I was doing, but again, thankfully, it didn't pan out. So it came a point where first child on the way. Right, Gerard, time to
earn some money.
Time to grow up. So I went into teaching, slightly with a slightly defeatist attitude. Okay, well, I'll do this. But oh my God, talk about a fish to water. I absolutely loved
it.
I loved teaching. It was the making of me. It was just the most fantastic thing.
Was that St Aloysius? Did you go straight in there, or did you teach before then?
No, so at that point, there were no teaching jobs, so you were on supply.
Right, okay.
So I taught the first school I was in, the best school, I think, even including St Aloysius, was St Roch's Primary in the Garngad. Again, a pretty rough secondary, my apologies. A pretty rough school. And I'd gone in and I'd worked in a pretty rough pub in the build up to it. So I'd gone in, and it was a huge learning experience, you know, being plonked in front of all these wains. Yeah. So there's an element of theatre. The best teachers are performers.
Definitely.
Without doubt.
Yeah, I can remember my favourite teacher, it was when Latin was still a subject at school, Mrs MacDonald, and she was an actress, and she just used to tell stories of Greek mythology and have everybody captivated. We never learned anything apart from a good story. Wonderful. And it was amazing, and people used to go look forward to that class just to be told stories. And she was the best teacher, best storyteller anyway. And it was amazing. I loved it.
So and I suppose going in, the problem is with teachers, and again I think teachers get a tough time, but you know, you build yourself up as a musician to a performance. In teaching, you're doing it 7-8 times a day, different classes. Yeah. And again, part of my story is already known. It beat me. You know, I mean, I threw probably too much at it. I got a job at St Aloysius as a teacher, and I was principal teacher there. The guy who'd taken over as principal teacher, it didn't work out for him. So I was principal teacher at the age of 29. And I was up for it. I was ready for it. Right. So I thought, but, and we did something amazing at St Aloysius. And again, if there's any old Aloysians listening to this, they'll be nodding as we say this, because we created in what was and what still is primarily an academically driven school.
Yeah.
We created this amazing art element within it all, within the mix, which from a standing start, I mean, stats-wise, when I went, there were 4 kids doing O-level. When I left, I think almost every kid in the school was doing standard grade.
That's just opened their eyes to the world of art, basically.
Amazing. So why couldn't you have doctors, lawyers who have that extra string to their bow? But a lot of the success was down to myself and the 2 other members of staff at that point. Brilliant girls. But without knowing it, a lot of the pressure, as the department grew, the numbers grew, the pressure built and built and built and built.
Was that the pressure from the school to produce good grades, or was it pressure from the parents? I can imagine that a private school, maybe it could be easier in terms of discipline, maybe, but you would have certain kind of outside pressures that would be on top of your shoulders.
That's right.
At such a young age as well.
That's right. So that's exactly right. In St Roch's, a lot of the pressures was dealing with tough kids. Mm. In St Aloysius, you didn't really have behaviour issues to deal with, but you'd loads of pressure. And looking back on it, David, I could forgive myself. I could say, poor me, the pressure was terrible and all that, but I think it was maybe in my nature. I do things to 100%.
Yeah, just all in.
And there's no way that I wasn't able to dial down. So as it became more and more and more difficult just to deliver for all the reasons, I didn't really have an off switch. So the mistake I made, the big mistake I made was from having been someone who didn't really drink, I started to drink to cope with the pressure, to get to sleep. I mean, bizarrely,
you were just taking your work home with you. You just stressed out. I just couldn't switch off, affecting family.
Young family, and I was like a caged lion. I was also working quite hard at my art again, and I just couldn't see the way ahead. I suppose I just felt completely trapped, and as I say, turned gently initially, but eventually turned to alcohol as some kind of to try and switch my brain off, which it did.
Yeah, just numbed that pressure.
Yep.
A wee bit, just found happiness in something else, to be honest.
But then you've got the next morning, and then you've so...
You've still got to go. And your wife was aware of all this, I take it? She stood by you through it all?
She did. Ellen's an amazing girl in our journey, so we are 40 years married next year. So, she did. And I think it wasn't obvious. I think this is always been the problem with me. When the train finally went off the rails, I think everybody was shocked because I appeared up to that point to be holding it together. The department was still running really well. The grades were fantastic. I was back to my art. I was producing some really amazing paintings.
You were still fully functioning. You were still doing your thing.
Absolutely. To
the best of your ability. You just were taking that home with you and you couldn't switch off, and that was your off switch, was supposed to drink.
But the trouble was brewing inside. And eventually, and again, I could look at it and I could say, gosh, what a shame for me. But what happened was, it was tailor-made. It was perfect for me. Had I had a heart attack, I would still have looked the same, and I could have buried it. But I lost all my hair. Yep. It was an incredible experience. I mean, and I'd had alopecia in bouts when I was younger, at periods of really kind of high stress. I had it at art school at one point. So I looked completely. So I think people were horrified.
So what was the time scale for that then? From, like, did you just suddenly, obviously didn't just wake up one morning and all your hair and your alopecia had kicked in, but it was a short space of time.
It wasn't far off that.
It wasn't far off.
I mean, you're talking weeks, maybe months at
Really?
most. So from, again, vain, this full head of dark blonde hair, it was kind of my thing, and I considered myself to be fairly handsome, and bit by bit it was astonishing. So waking up in the pillow would be covered in hair.
Really?
So it was obvious stuff was going wrong.
Yeah.
But it took a while, so with a matter of weeks, and then I was aware of it starting to go into my growth and my beard. So at that point, it was right. Okay, something.
I realised enough was enough. Yeah.
Seriously wrong. And I tried to go back.
Were you still working at that point, Gerard?
I was still working, still going into school.
Yeah.
And we came to, it was the Easter break. And it was obvious things were not good. No, in fact, I'm wrong. It was the October break. I'd gone back. My hair had started to fall out, and it came at the October break. And I'd decided at one point it was getting desperate. I went and got what was left of my hair shaved off. So, I mean, it was real, wow, what's going on with Gerard here? And the October break, I took the family, went over to Cyprus, and I remember I sat on this. I should go back there someday. I sat in this rock in Colossi, and I fixed it, and I thought, and I came back, and I'd been away for hours. They were all going, Gerard, where have you been? I said, no, it's okay, I know what I'm doing. So I just never went back.
That was you?
I just never went back.
Never went back to work. And do you think that almost, like, that was a new beginning? Like, people like maybe lose weight or change their appearance in some way. This has obviously been forced upon you, but it almost stripped you back to a Gerard 2.0, basically, a new Gerard.
So you think about your hair. Every hair on your body is probably 6 months old. So I literally shed the past. If you look at it metaphorically,
totally.
I literally shed the past. And I emerged as this shiny, new...
polished head.
creature. But I mean, it was almost like test driving.
Yeah.
I remember it, going in, and I tried to kind of keep up with my friends from school, really close friends. I was there for 10 years. And I would tell jokes that people would laugh at when I was Gerard Burns, the teacher. And nobody would laugh.
Nobody would laugh.
It was amazing. It was literally test driving this new... And okay, if you're going to redefine yourself as an artist, the look, the bald head was quite a look.
Yeah.
So it was a complete and utter line. Now again, I've got to go back to you were asking about, did Ellen stick by me? I mean, I had to say at one point, I don't know who I'm going to be at the end of this. I literally don't know who I'm going to be. I don't know if you'll like me.
You were changing that much. You just felt not just physically. You just felt
I have to completely
personality changing.
I have to completely rework this. I don't know if I'll like me. But Ellen was amazing. I mean, she was always of the. And I suppose actually, from her, we should get her onto one of these podcasts. Maybe she actually decided that she liked the person I was becoming more better than the guy I'd been. Because there was lots of, mad stuff going on. So yeah, and then slowly, left teaching.
You could probably see the happiness coming back in you, Gerard.
Took a while. I mean, I really had to batten down the hatches. I had to shut myself off for a while.
And really work on yourself.
Bury myself in the studio, and the art was real therapy. So you think about it, principal teacher, 3 wee boys, mortgage, that real pressure point in your life where money is really important, it's really tight. Good news, hen. I'm chucking it, and I'm going to be an artist. It'll be fine,
Was your art known then?
I'd had a degree of success. I'd won a couple of prizes, so it wasn't like I'm going to be a race car driver. Or I'm going to. I already, there was something there. And released from the burden, if you like, of the 9 to 5, I made amazing number of paintings. And the equation in my head was, well, if I can sell that for 50 quid and I can make X number a week and X number a month, that covers
my wage.
And that was the equation.
Did you find, and this might not be accurate at all, but did you find that when you made the decision to go to a full-time artist as opposed to a art teacher or principal art teacher who was also an artist, did you find that the value in your art automatically rose because you were now a full-time artist?
I did. And I think, again, in terms of people who are considering making a big change in your life, in their lives, you can factor in only so much. You can do your sums, you can plan, but there's, until you actually make that step, I mean, I visualised it as I'm speaking to you, step through that doorway. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's on the other side. You might think you do. And the thing that I could never have factored in was that as a as a teacher who painted, my work was only ever going to be worth a certain amount. It tripled in value. Now, I'm not talking from $5,000 to 15. I'm talking from 500 to 1,500.
A jump, though.
But that was gigantic in terms of the number that I needed to earn to keep the show on the road.
Yeah.
So, in actual fact, the bit that I was worried about the most was paying the mortgage. That took care of itself almost immediately.
Which would have reinforced the fact that you've made the right decision.
Yeah.
Definitely, and then that gave you the confidence to keep painting, keep expressing yourself. Had you built a studio at that point?
We had a studio, yes, I had a studio and no, gosh, actually, now you're asking. At that point, I was working out of a garage, really tight garage in the previous house. And what I did was we managed to buy an extra wee bit of land at the back of the house, and I built the studio afterwards. Right, okay. So, I mean, looking back, big gambles, actually. But it was obvious, there was no... And again, Ellen was 100%, if we're going to do this, you need somewhere to work. So we built this big studio.
So you've explored, obviously, certain themes throughout your art career. You're a very patriotic, proud Scots person. Mm-hmm. Take us through the different themes and what inspired them and what they mean to you, because I love them. I can lose myself in your paintings, and I've said that to you from someone that actually knew nothing, and I still don't know nothing about art, but I wasn't really into art until someone showed me your painting. It was a Doddy Weir painting, and then I done my homework and started seeing the kind of the mythology ones, the wolves, the saltires and the forests and whatever else, and I can stare at them all day long. I would rather watch a painting than watch TV sometimes because it just opens your mind. Your mind wanders and you can start to think. You think freely because there's no distraction there. And I think your paintings, they tell a story, but the story is so subjective to whoever's looking at them. That's why I love them. That's why I made contact for you to try and get you on this show. So, what was your initial themes? It was all kind of realism and portrait. Obviously, very talented portrait artist as well. Was that how it started?
So, the story that I've already told you about the angels. There are certain things that I do where I will set out and I maybe have a story to tell. I made a painting recently as a contribution to COP26 in Glasgow. And I made a COP26 painting. That was the intention. And I brought to that a perspective, my own perspective, using kids. But a lot of the work that I do, I'm simply scanning, and you're waiting for a thing to either present itself or to pop up. In the saltire is a perfect example. Everywhere I went in the world, literally, if I'd be looking at a crowd, if I'd be looking at a photograph, I'd be looking at the TV, if there was a saltire, it literally jumped out at me. To the point where I thought, I can't understand why nobody's using this. If you think about Renaissance paintings, they used fabrics, they used flags, they used these amazing combinations of these really strong primary colours with figures. So it was just dead obvious. So I made the first big saltire painting, The Rowan, which is the saltire is almost 80% of the canvas. Yeah. I made these rainy day paintings, and I remember my dad saying to me, Gerard, who is ever going to buy a painting of Glasgow in the rain? But I thought, well, that's what we see. Why would I paint super brightly coloured landscapes when we don't live in a super brightly coloured landscape? Yeah. So I made rainy day paintings. And when I was in teaching, again, one of the things I missed the most about teaching is the staff room. In a staff room in teaching, you have these amazing brains, completely different brains, all forced into the one room. So I would come in and say, I was listening to a piece of music, Death in the Maiden, Schubert's Death in the Maiden. And the classicist, the Latin teacher would say, I know, but have you looked at such and such? And the English teacher would say, well, I've got a book that you can. And the music teacher would say, no, but there's... So a lot of that sparked my interest initially in Greek mythology and trying to reinterpret some of the old Greek myths. I made some paintings, and I have again based on music. So the themes present themselves, and I've always said as an artist, the sketchbook should always be 3 years ahead of where I am. At the point where I have no ideas in the sketchbook, it's time to chuck it.
Right, okay.
You know, so there's always, and every now and again, a wild card will present itself, and that takes you on yet another wee journey. So there's no one particular route. At the moment, I'm experimenting. I'm pushing quite hard into 3 dimensions, and that's proved to be tough from a technical point of view. But if I get that right, that opens up, I mean, a world, another complete world. So, do you know, there's loads of things, and it really the biggest thing in the equation is my time. That's the if I can split myself into 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. So it's trying to manage the time.
I remember when I met you before, you mentioned that you were supported, or you were kind of inspired by your time in London, businessman down in London. So you created a painting which is amazing. It's by the term balancing act, and it's basically suited and booted businessmen that are walking a tightrope between landmark tall buildings in London with money surrounding them. And I spoke to you and said, I love that painting, but I would never have it up in my house, because at first sight it looks like I'm this guy with loads of money around about me. But when you look deeper into it, it's actually, and it affects us all, whether you're working class, whether you're a multi-millionaire, you know, you're still balancing time and money. It's a question that no one can ever kind of answer correctly. But tell us about the kind of story behind that and how that came about.
So, that is an interesting one, I suppose, because that's a perfect example of people bringing themselves to a painting. You bring 10 people and stand them in front of a painting, you would assume that every one of those, I would initially have assumed, they're all going to see the same thing. They're all going to see the thing that I meant. But they don't. People bring themselves depending on where they are in their lives. So when I decided to go full-time at this, and looking back in those days, it was real hand-to-mouth stuff. You know, so one thing I would say about myself is, if anybody ever gives me an opportunity, I'll follow through on it. I'll do the best I can with it. And I was introduced to a couple of guys who bought my work, who were in the buildings, the architects, quantity surveyors, property developers. A couple of guys in Glasgow, and one guy, particular guy called Phil Diamond, who bought my work, put on a couple of exhibitions. And he introduced me to a couple of guys based down south, a guy called David Roberts. And I found myself in London really for the first time in my life. And I was taken under the wing of these guys. I think they obviously saw something in what I was doing. So they bought my work, they introduced me to people. But when I looked at what they were doing, looked at the lives that they led, I thought, you guys, they were all in every day. So the initial balancing acts weren't that they were simply paintings. The very first ones were simply a male figure facing away with a blank background. Initially it was paper, and then it was money, working my way towards what I was trying to say. But the balancing acts for me were a representation of what I saw, what I experienced working with these guys down in London, and the money in it. So you've got the figure high on this high wire, balanced, and some people, you're right about people, some people will read it differently. Some people say, that's me. Look how clever I am. I'm the guy, every day I'm up there. But with a bit of maturity, a bit of experience, you're saying, well, all you need to do is to reach too far.
Yeah, that's everybody.
Everybody. So it's a metaphor, not just in terms of business, it's a metaphor for contemporary life. We're all on that high wire.
Totally. It doesn't matter how much money you've got, you're still balancing that time with bills and money and commitments and whatever.
And even
else.
opportunities. So if the money, if it was an allegory, if you were to think about it, not as pound notes, but as opportunity, reach again, which I did, probably in teaching again, so I came off the
you
the
came
high
off
wire
how you hit the deck.
Spectacularly.
So then, like, portraits still was a feature then as well.
Always.
You're still doing portraits in your commissions and that to this day.
Yep.
Some notable celebrities.
Yeah.
Billy Connolly, Ewan McGregor.
Yep.
Doddy Weir, certain American actors, actresses and stuff as well.
So portrait, because as you were asking about, when I, looking back as a kid, one of the things that I was always able to do was to draw and paint faces. And it's the most difficult thing, without any question, because as human beings, we know faces. You think about where CGI is in terms of movie making. It's possible to create these incredible landscapes, but the faces are never quite 100% because it's the most difficult. So it was an obvious thing for me to paint faces. And actually, in terms of paying the bills, people were always willing to pay a wee bit to have a portrait created. So, and it's run in tandem. I would have said at points portraiture was more, and what you could say the kind of general studio work was less. And then it comes back. At the moment, portraits are really, it's the most important thing I do. And I've got a goal for myself, and this will sound quite conceited, but I want to try to establish myself as the premier portrait painter of my generation. That's where I'm aiming. I can make, and I'm good at portraits.
Yeah.
Sorry, David, I'm going to have to go back again.
Okay.
The whole hand skills and creativity thing. I have the hand skills as such that I can make paint do anything. I'm not good at portraits because I can paint good faces. I'm good at portraits because I am able to understand the brief, and I'm able to understand what the sitter hopes for. If I were to paint your portrait, David, there are 100, 1,000 different portraits that we could make. My real skill is in being able to pare that back. So it's an exercise in psychology. We need to work out who we're painting. And you mentioned the Doddy Weir portrait.
Yeah, I was just going to come on to that, yeah.
So I think I got that 100% right. Had I painted Doddy's portrait 5 years previously or 10 years previously, it would have been a completely different painting. The painting I made of Doddy at that point, the signals that painting sends, the Borders landscape, that real soft Scottish landscape, the suit that he's wearing, the shoulders back, the pose, the hands in the pockets, and you can see the pain in his eyes. That painting, we got that absolutely right.
That's how I was aware of your work. Obviously, for any listeners who don't know who Doddy Weir is, Scottish international rugby legend who was diagnosed with motor neuron disease in 2017, I think. He recognised that there was it was a death sentence. There was still no cure or meaningful treatment for motor neuron disease. So he set up the My Name's Doddy Foundation, which was a charity that I completed my charity challenge for the 100 kilograms up Ben Nevis. But it was his painting that I seen that then introduced me to you, and you were kind enough to give me a framed print of that painting. Wow. After there you go. After completing that challenge, and it hangs in my house. And when you study it, you see the defiance in his face, but he knows that his time is coming to an end. Yeah. There's the storm clouds in the background that are just sweeping in, basically. And you see the sadness in his eyes, but he's still standing there, big 6'7" or whatever he was, proud Scotsman, his shoulders back. He's up for it. He's up for a fight, but he knew in his face, he managed to actually capture the fact that he knows he's not going to win that fight.
There's a story, and I don't know if I can tell it without, I usually get upset trying to tell it, but so in the painting, the image I had of the Eildon Hills, which is the background to the painting, it was a really sunny day. The photograph that I had to work from, and when I put the thing together, I thought it's not right. There has to be trouble. So I imposed the storm clouds, right, okay. And there are rain clouds. You can actually see the rain falling. There's dark streaks of the rain in the background to this. And when we unveiled Doddy's portrait at the Portrait Gallery, it's a brilliant time with Doddy. An amazing character on so many levels, but he took me aside and he said, "You've still never told me what the rays of light are at the back of the painting." I said, "Which rays of light?" "The 4 rays of light at the back of the painting." I said, "Doddy, those aren't rays of light, that's rain clouds." But as a metaphor for what he did and how he did it, he didn't see the rain clouds.
Yeah. Yeah, he's. I don't want to upset you even more. No, he's
truly amazing. He saw the light.
Yeah, he saw the light. He did. That was him. And I remember speaking to you, and you'd said that you'd seen death so many times in your kind of lifetime, and it was just prior to Doddy passing, and you'd just recently been to see him, and you said, "I'm really going to struggle when he goes. Like, you're really going to struggle," and it just shows he touched so many people. Yep. And we should say that the actual original painting was taken to auction in Hong Kong for the My Name's Doddy Foundation, and it reached £100,000.
I think probably the official figure was 100, but I think it was actually more, because what we did was we crowdfunded it, so there was more money came in afterwards. That was I think we said initially that opportunities present themselves. I like to think. I need to think in terms of visuals. I believe that all of us in our lives right at this moment, there are all these opportunities, and if you think about them as threads, I've discovered that one of my life skills is that from all of the infinite number of threads I could pull on, I'm able to identify which of the threads is most likely to take me on a journey, on the best journey. And if you think about that Doddy Weir portrait, I mean, that from absolutely nothing, it was suggested, how would you feel about, which led to the making of the portrait, which led to us taking it to Hong Kong, which led to my time with Doddy. It was the most unbelievable. I mean, from literally nothing to have raised, I think it was near £150,000.
That's amazing.
For the charity. It was just remarkable. I mean, and if you to try and reverse engineer it, you couldn't make it up. Yeah. It was just meant to be.
Just actually. That opportunity there, and it raised so much awareness. It led to me. It led to me completing my challenge, and lots of other people as well. But that wasn't the only thing you've done for charity. I mean, it's important that you're recognised for your charity work, and you've donated and gifted so many pieces and percentages of purchase prices to different cancer charities, etc. over the years as well. So you've shared your success with different charities and make sure other people have benefited from it.
I keep saying I'm not a wealthy man, but I make these paintings which are worth a bit of money, and as long as I have enough in terms of what I need for exhibitions and everything else, then I don't want to talk it down, but it's not that big a deal for me, David. I'm delighted to be able to help when I can. The problem actually has gone the other way, that because my work does tend to raise a lot of money at charity events, I'm kind of deluged by people asking. So I've got to be a bit strict about, if people ask, I'll say, well, I can't this year, but we'll look at it again next time. And the work has raised. I'm always, it's too awkwardly patting yourself on the back. The opportunity's there for me to help raise money for these charities, and I know that people work much, much, much harder, right, yourself included, to maybe raise less money. I get a bit of a spotlight because the paintings are taken to these events. They're in the auction. There's an applause when it goes for a big number. But I'm in a position to be able to do that. I think that there are people who put in far more hours and raise less money who deserve. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I get that. I mean, I do get what you're saying. But on the flip side of that, there's so many people out there that are equally in as good a position to help, and they choose not to.
Okay. Yep.
So you should still be commended for that.
Okay.
So I appreciate you trying to play it down. And I understand what you're saying. People work hard. They put themselves through more kind of physical or mental stress to raise a smaller amount.
Yep.
Whereas you enjoy what you do, you love it, you get to meet these people,
Yep.
you learn from them, you're inspired from them. But in turn, your painting then has a knock-on domino effect as well. We'll start to wind down the podcast now. I think your story is one of resilience, Gerard, to deal with the death of your sister at 18 when she was only 14, to have the kind of disappointment through art school, have your career taken off, and actually making such a success of your teaching career that it then became detrimental to your health. You then turned to alcohol. There was alcohol abuse, there was a nervous breakdown, there was a loss of your hair through alopecia. But you're now a successful artist that has paintings owned by royal families and celebrities and normal people all over the world. Yep. What would you say to people, not just budding artists or musicians, but people of all ages that have a dream, but life's not been maybe quite so easy, or it's not going as they expect it to be just now? You've shown that there's always hope there.
I suppose that the obvious answer is kind of stick with it. I know that's impossible for a lot of people where they are dealing with so many other external, real problems, putting food on the table, paying mortgages. I think if you could believe in yourself. So I have to answer this by being maybe a bit brutal, tough love and all that. First of all, you have to believe that what it is you want to do, that you're good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's tough. It could be that for some people they have a dream. I was lucky that I was good enough at the end of the day to be able to deliver. But okay, so the flip side of that is what they say. 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. You need work at it. There's no free rides. My success has come on the back of me being probably a bit of a workaholic, being a bit of obsessive about it. That's the key. It's not about going and sit and having cups of coffee and thinking. You've got to actually, if you want to do a thing, really make it your job.
Roll up your sleeves and just get on with it.
Get on with it. And at the end of the day, see if it doesn't pan out, at least, and I suppose this was something that Ellen and I always said, at least you can say, I tried my best there. There's no if onlys. If only I had, if you know that you've really given it your best shot and it hasn't worked out. And the thing is, see if it doesn't work out the way you're imagining at the start, if you throw that kind of energy at something, something will happen.
No, definitely. Because you've not failed, you've just learned something.
You've just
new.
learned.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
exactly there, yeah.
Plenty of people fail time and time and time again, but sooner or later it'll come good.
And actually, David, if you look at my story from a certain perspective is a story of failure after failure.
It totally is. It is.
Failed teacher, failed musician. Okay, so there's another perspective, but just in it. But work, get up in the morning and go to your bloody work. That's the
work hard.
Yeah, there's the answer.
I think that the obviously the topic of this podcast is remember resilience, and there's guests coming on that will chat more about is resilience and the ability to graft and work hard and get the job done. Is that a kind of dying trait in today's modern ultra real materialistic world? And I think there is some people out there that want, but they don't actually want to work for it. And success does not come easy.
No, for sure.
So, Gerard, thanks very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great to chat.